Okay, peace, y'all. I had to make this video right quick. You know, it seems like the House of Consciousness got another Kemetic champion to battle against the Hebrews, and his name is the Brother Jabari. Now, to this man's credit, he by far is the most mature out of all the Kemetic messiahs I have seen. You know, I like that about him. But we're going to talk about these issues that he bring up. Let's go to the first cut.
If you look quickly, you see thou shalt not kill, you see thou shalt not commit adultery, you see thou shalt not steal. All of those are admonishments that come initially from the 42 laws. We have here, I shall not cheat in the fields. In terms of adultery, O fiend who comes from the slaughterhouse, I have not committed adultery. So I want you to understand that when I say that 8 of them come from the laws of the 42, first of all, you have to understand that this is not something that I have said. There are a myriad of scholars that recognize, and they may not say that they come directly from, they'll say that there are similarities, but you have to understand that this is much older. The text that comes from ancient Kemet is far older.
Okay, the Brother Jabari is committing another fallacy here known as post hoc ergo propter hoc. And in Latin, that means after this, therefore, because of this. And here's the complete definition. The post hoc fallacy is a logical fallacy that states, since event Y followed event X, event Y must have been caused by event X. And I would actually say that this is probably the number one fallacy committed by people in the Kemetic community. Because what they will often say is, well, we find these passages that are earlier than the bigger biblical text, so therefore they must have been the cause of the biblical text, or the biblical text stole from them. Okay? This is a correlation versus causation issue. Finding previous passages that look similar to the biblical text is something called correlation. Okay? It's like, okay, this looks the same, this looks the same. That's a correlation. But in order to claim that the biblical text took, borrowed, or stole something, you then must demonstrate causality. Okay? So what was the cause of this correlation? And oftentimes they fail to demonstrate that. Now, he's actually going to run into a bit of trouble using this kind of fallacy of saying, well, because this is earlier, therefore the biblical text got it from them. So when you look at the 42 confessions, they're dated to roughly around 1280 to 1250 BC on the Papyrus Ani. But you have the Code of Hammurabi that's dated to 1750 BC, and the Code of Ur-Nammu dated to 2100 BC. So if I was to be like Jabari and use this kind of argumentation, I would then say, well, because the Code of Hammurabi and the Code of Ur-Nammu come before the 42 negative confessions, therefore the Egyptians stole these ideas of not killing and stealing from the people in the Middle East. Now, that's not how you do scholarship, because me saying that is just simply demonstrating a correlation. Now, if you want to keep it all the way real, the Code of Ur-Nammu looks a hell of a lot more like what we see in the Torah, more so than we see in the 42 negative confessions. Like, for example, you look here, it gives the law, then gives the consequence of the law, just like what we see in the Torah. Like right here, it says, if a man commits a murder, that man must be killed. If a man commits a robbery, he will be killed. See, that right there is the style in which the Torah is written, where I'm going to give you the law, and if you do not follow that, this is what's going to happen. When you look at the 42 negative confessions, it doesn't give the consequence for breaking the confessions. But that's another topic for another time.
In the tradition that you follow, the Hebrew people make a very clear distinction between their spiritual traditions and the spiritual traditions of other peoples that were there earlier than them. In fact, even in your document, even in the Torah, it even talks about how your people, and I'm using that with air quotes, even though I'm not using the air quotes literally, actually should be victorious over those other people, partially because they worship another god. So if those are particular distinctions between those people and the people that you are referencing, the people that you believe are your people, then how could you use the same name? If you want to distinguish yourself from a group of people, particularly on the basis of a differing spiritual form, using the same name for those deities is problematic.
Okay, what the brother Jabari is failing to understand is the difference between cultural and religious practice and language. Okay? Canaanite, Hebrew, Akkadian, Eblite, Aramaic, all of these are in the Semitic family group. Okay? So there's going to be a variety of words that cross over and intersect with one another. El will be one of those words. He speaks of El as if it originated with the Canaanites, when actually that word traces all the way back to Akkad. But we're going to go into more detail about that later. Let's see what else he says right here.
Israel can be translated as El goes through. You are referencing a pagan, and I only use that word because it's a word that I hear brothers in your community use.
Okay, the brother Jabari is committing a fallacy that's commonly used within the Kemetic community, where they often use etymology of a word instead of the word's usage. See, a definition is the word's usage, and etymology is the word's origin. So when you're trying to comprehend what you're reading, you first need to figure out in what context is this word being used, in what time period is this word being used. If it's used in a particular time period, it may mean something different. To suggest that because somebody is invoking something that may have pagan roots, therefore they're pagan, is a lack of reading comprehension. For example, I speak English, and if you speak this language, you're invoking all kind of deities in regular talk and speech. If I tell you I have work on Friday, I'm invoking Freya, the Norse deity, right then and there. If I tell you I see you Saturday, there goes Saturn. Sunday, we already knows what that means, okay? So what Jabari is basically saying is if he saw me, Alvin Elmore, who subscribes to the biblical text, he may say something like, wow, this guy says he wants to follow Israelite religion and culture, but yet in this memo, he said he's going to see somebody on Friday. Why would he say Friday giving reverence to Freya when he claims to only worship Yahweh? This is the kind of argument that Jabari is posing, and it's a logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy. Here's the definition. It's a fallacy of irrelevance where a conclusion is suggested based solely on someone's or something's history, origin, or source rather than its current meaning or context.
In English, when we talk about the divine force, we often use the word God. God is a Germanic word. There is no language that does not come fraught with culture. There is no language that does not come with the history of a people. But in English, we seem to believe that the word God is a neutral term that describes a divine force. It is not. It comes from a people who have a particular religious and spiritual background, and also people that use a particular language.
Okay, that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a textbook example of the genetic fallacy. Let's look what he did with the word God. He said everybody's acting like the word God is some neutral term, and it's not. Then he goes back to the origin and says it comes from a specific people and it's a Germanic word and all of this stuff. So what he just did is based a conclusion solely off the words history, origin, or source rather than its current meaning or context. In the current meaning and context of 21st century English, the word God is a neutral term. You could be referring to Christian God. You could be referring Hindu gods, Egyptian gods, Greek gods, and that's exactly how El is used in Semitic languages. El was not just used by the Canaanites. It was used by the Akkadians. It was used by the Hittites. It was used by the Aramaeans. That is the Semitic word for God. And it has neutral usage, but it also can refer to the specific deity in Canaan. Much like in English, when people say God, in general, when people say that word, they're thinking of the Christian God. Okay? But the word is not limited to the Christian God, because you have some people saying, I believe in God, I just don't believe in the Christian God. That is the proper context in how El was used in Semitic languages. But let's get more detailed into this. Let's go into the etymology of the word El. So I'm reading from the encyclopedia right here, okay? And I put the link in the description. You can follow along with me if you want. El is a Northwest Semitic word meaning God or deity, or referring to any one of multiple major ancient Near Eastern deities. A rarer spelling, Elah, represents the predicate form in Old Akkadian and in Amorite. The word is derived from the Proto-Semitic archaic biliteral $El, meaning God. Or I basically should say Il right there, because that's usually how it's pronounced or how they spell it. So let's read on. In Northwest Semitic use, El was both a generic word for any god and the special name or title of a particular god who was distinguished from other gods as being the god. El is listed at the head of many pantheons. In some Canaanite and Ugaritic sources, El played a role as father of the gods or of creation. However, because the word sometimes refers to a god other than the great god El, it is frequently ambiguous as to whether El followed by another name means the great god El with a particular epithet applied or refers to another god entirely. So this is really the problem with Jabari's argument. When he looks at the biblical text, he sees the word El and automatically jumps to the conclusion that this is referencing the Canaanite deity El. But he leaves out the context that even within the Ugaritic text, it's rather ambiguous whether El is referencing the great god El or whether it's referencing another deity like Moloch or Hadad or Asherah, who was called the cervix of the Elohim.
So what you'll have to understand is when you look for Canaanite artifacts, you will see that their deity is named El. Is it possible a later people took that word for their God and said this word means power? That is saying to you right off the bat, that these people are actually the same people at different periods trying to reference different things.
Okay, what the brother Jabari is still failing to understand is that El, the term El, is not limited to the Canaanites. The term El is the word for God going all the way back to Proto-Semitic. The Akkadians use the word El. In the Eblite language, the word for God is El. In Hittite, the word for God is El. In Canaanite, the word for God is El, all the way down to Hebrew. So how about instead of saying, okay, because they're using the term El, therefore they came from Canaanites, a more scholarly way of looking at it is, okay, they're using the word El. Why? Because they speak a Semitic dialect.